Ranking Member Paul, recognized for your questions.
I'd like to have a stab at answering your question about, when did the emergencies arise? And I would probably put it together, when did the emergence of a strong central executive arise? And at some point, all the way back to the Civil War, many would say the 20th century, many would say the Great Depression, but without question, the executive has grown in power and Congress has diminished in power over the last 100 years. Part of that's emergency power and part of that's many other things. Most of the questions I get about a regulation of this business or that business, we never voted on. And this has been a big question now between the Supreme Court on Chevron deference, whether or not we write the regulations or we just give broad frameworks and regulatory agencies write all the regulations. But I'd say it's a long-term trend and emergency powers is part of that. Now, the argument has been made that, and this is a common argument around here, and I disagree with it, that, well, the only thing that's popular is reforming just the NEA, leave IEPA out, leave everything else out because this is popular, we can get it done. It's possible. There are other really important things, maybe more important, but they just can't pass. I would argue that sometimes something is so popular that other issues that are related can be discussed and may well be accepted. All three of you said that the internet kill switch is probably the most important and possibly abused power, hasn't been used, but that could be so devastating that someone could become dictator, basically. You control all the communications in the country, you could become dictator in a day, in a moment, in one executive order. And we have that in our bill for reform. We have it in there. You all seem to agree. I think there's a lot of agreement up here on getting rid of the internet kill switch. So why sell ourselves short? Let's don't just say, oh, we're only going to do this one thing. Yes, the most important thing is changing from where we have to override a veto to kill an emergency. We have to have a 2/3 vote. That is way too high a burden. We need to get it back to that it expires and that then we can then vote. But let's don't sell ourselves short. Let's have a real robust discussion. Let's just don't say, oh, well, I'm against the internet kill switch, but it just isn't the time. And so I'm going to vote no because we'll do it some other time. Some other time never comes. So now is the time. And the general category, they all fit, are emergencies. I would argue, and I agree with Ms. Goyton, the Insurrection Act is 1,000 times more potent and has the potential for turning the place into military rule overnight, that it's more important than any of the 4 emergencies that we'd fix with changing this. I'm for fixing it so all these emergencies expire and that we have to reaffirm them. That's a great reform. But the Insurrection Act is probably more deadly and more powerful than anything we're discussing today. So we actually have that in my reform bill. I know I'm not going to get everything I want, but let's talk about it now. We're talking about emergencies. My Insurrection Act reform would simply say, President can't send the military anywhere without the approval of Congress. I'm really not for sending the military domestically. I really don't think the military should ever be used domestically. If we're talking about handing out water or preventing a foreign invasion in a time of a hurricane, maybe. But our soldiers are great, but they're not trained to obey the Fourth Amendment. Our police are, and even that's imperfect, but our police know about the Fourth Amendment. They know they have to get warrants. Armies don't get warrants. It is a potential for a huge disaster. So we should have the debate over the Insurrection Act. Maybe we can do it in a separate hearing, in a separate bill, but we're going to at least bring it up on this. And if I get a chance, that's one thing that I will want us to vote on. Take a stand. Do you think the president should be allowed to send the military into our cities? I think no. The approval of the governor is not enough. I can imagine a governor that makes a bad decision too. And then it's 2 people have made the decision to have military rule in an area. And then if it doesn't expire, it could go on forever. So the Insurrection Act should also expire too, so Congress would have to, I think from the very outset, troops shouldn't go in without our approval. But even if that happens, it should expire in a short period of time. The problem with giving 30 days for the Insurrection Act and patterning out an emergency is 30 days is a long time to have troops in your cities. So I would say is none. I would not allow troops to go in at all without an affirmative vote at that time of Congress to allow troops to go in. And I would almost assuredly vote no on that for anybody. We have police. The police are very well armed. The police, deal with riots in our cities. And that's the way we should deal with it, because it is a tough job to figure out due process for people and figure out the difference between protest and riot and between violence and how we deal with it. And so I would just argue, let's be more open-minded to talking about the Insurrection Act. And I would say that the internet kill switch, I think we can get some bipartisan support for just getting rid of that. Most people are horrified. You tell any of your constituents that the president could shut it down, and it works both ways. The left may go home and say, oh, Trump's going to do this, and the right goes home and says Biden's going to do this. I don't want anybody to do this, and no one should have ever been given the power to shut down all transmissions. Now, I have heard from some people who say, oh, well, you know, what about sending out emergency broadcast or something? That's not what this is. And I don't think we need to have this power to send out emergency broadcasts that there's a hurricane coming or something. But anyway, I would just argue for being more inclusive and not limiting ourselves to only one thing, even if the others can't pass. I may not get my way on IEPA, but if we only do 4 emergencies and we leave all the other IEPA out there, I see no reason why if we're not for, if I'm skeptical that sanctions work. But those who like sanctions, vote on it. They're stronger if you actually vote on it. Let them expire in 6 months. President does them, let them expire. We don't have to do each one, bulk them into the emergencies, do all Russias together, all China's together. But then if you think sanctions work, they're stronger, having been voted on by Congress. So I'm open response to anybody who wants to argue with me that we should limit this to only one thing.
I would never. But
Politic.
But I would note, you know, we speak of the 2019 reform that we worked on this committee that you both voted on and participated in. It's kind of shorthanded. We speak about it as having carved out IEPA, and I think in one sense that's true. But it actually did pull in and removed the authority, not just as a sunset, but removed the authority pursuant to IEPA for the president to unilaterally impose tariffs and rate quotas. So that's a small piece. That's not everything you're talking about.
Carper's piece was included in that?
I
think he has an individual bill on that.
I believe it was Senator Portman and yeah, maybe
Carper,
Senator
yeah.
Carper. And so it was offered as an amendment, and then I think was wrapped into the base tax. Now that's not all of IEPA. That does not address what you're talking about. But I think you can. It showed that you can at least pull in some of the authorities that you're concerned about. And I don't want to. I just don't want my testimony here today to be thought of as just don't touch IEPA, just go forward. I'm saying you can. I just want to caution, just based on my experience here as a witness, to say that's what I experienced. And I am almost certain that if we had tried not to carve out any part of IEPA, the bill would have languished. Now, ultimately, it didn't pass anyway.
Just realize the frustration on our side. I get this all the time. I'll have people on the floor, and we'll get to an amendment finally on the floor and say, well, we've agreed to have no amendments. I'm going to vote against. Yours is a perfectly good amendment, young man, and we would, in any normal time, we'd be for you, but this time we're against you because we made a deal. No amendment. You know what I mean? So we just need to be more open-minded and not limit ourselves. I won't get everything I want. I won't get all of these things reformed, but let's don't preemptively say we can't. So I appreciate your comments. Anybody else?
Yeah, I want to be very clear. I am not saying, let's do this one thing because it's here, we can get it done and forget about the rest. The Brennan Center is actively advocating for reform of the Insurrection Act. We have a detailed legislative reform proposal. We are actively advocating for reform of IEPA. We have a detailed legislative reform proposal. We're looking at the Communications Act. I'm not entirely sure that full repeal is the right solution there. It might be. I think it's going to be important to look at whether some very dramatically narrowed version of that power might be needed in cases of, say, cybersecurity attacks or something like that. And again, this is something we're looking into right now. We might ultimately support repeal. But anyway, these are issues that I consider to be incredibly important, top priorities. But I do think that on the substance of what needs to be done with these authorities, they have to be dealt with differently and separately. Now, I suppose you could say, well, let's just write the reforms for each of those and tack it on to National Emergencies Act reform legislation. But that work has to be done, and it hasn't been done yet. And the work of sort of gathering the coalition, the consensus, the markup that was held on National Emergencies Act reform, the tire kicking that's happened over these past few years, I don't want to hold National Emergencies Act reform hostage to any of these other reforms, which I think are absolutely and
I don't think it will be, but I would suggest trying to come to a conclusion on the internet kill switch. This is a chance. It might be 5 years, it might be 10 years, it might be never. When you have a chance, go for it. And all it takes is, you've all said it was the most important power you would actually remove. So come to a conclusion on it. If you want to carve out for putting out PSAs on there's a hurricane coming, I don't think you need that. I think that's probably done through other legislation. It's actually mostly voluntary. Believe it or not, people will do things voluntarily in a crisis, you know. I mean, most people, plus most people don't even get it from government anymore. I mean, you know, your warnings are really mostly outside of government for emergencies. But anyway, come to a conclusion on this because, you know, if we want to bring this up in a month, you know, we just don't want, you know, your center, which is on our side on this, to be against including killing the internet, you know, the internet kill switch. And so just be open-minded, and if you can come to a conclusion, try to come to a conclusion. On the Insurrection Act, it's unlikely to be, but I will, you know, I'm a believer in having votes on stuff. I will have a vote on the Insurrection Act. And I think it is different. It won't be the same reform as the NEA. It has to be more strict than the NEA because you're talking about putting troops in our cities. And so I think troops in our cities should be a vote of Congress, no matter how good the cause is. I mean, there's so many other ways to deal with emergencies beyond having the Army in our cities.
If I could say one last quick thing. You refer to the 4 emergency declarations. I think it's actually 3 right now. One was terminated. So there's 3 emergency declarations that do not relate to IEPA that are currently in place. I just want to be clear. Those 3 emergency declarations are not the ones I'm worried about. It's the ones that haven't been declared yet. So I don't think we should downplay the significance of passing National Emergencies Act reform, even if it doesn't address IEPA, because there are untold declarations that could happen in the future. As Mr. Thalem says, it's the powers you haven't thought about yet. That is what we are preventing through this legislation.
Mr. Healy, can you close this out?
Yeah, I don't think anyone wants my advice on the politics of it, and it's not worth much, frankly. But I do see the merit in taking a broad approach to this and to deal with at least a few of the biggest substantive concerns. And again, discounting my political advice for what it's worth. That's not what I'm here to testify on. But I think we all agreed that the 1934 Communications Act provisions are a huge concern. And I think at this moment, when there is bipartisan interest in emergency power reforms, that some of the more dangerous, it's about what it's as Satya said, the ones we're not thinking about are important, but some of the ones that you would pick out, if there's an opportunity to tackle them and reform those powers, are also worth addressing.